MiLaysia Fulwiley is coming into this offseason with a new attitude, one that could prove down the road that she is not just a walking highlight reel.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also the lead publisher for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We gotta talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We got a lot we're going to talk about on this Friday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about the two position groups that changed my opinion of them this spring for South Carolina's football program. One in a positive way and one in a bit of a negative way. We'll dive into that later on. But I want to start off today's show by talking about MiLaysia Fulwiley. Now, South Carolina, they went 38-0, undefeated, and won the national championship this past season. And I have to be honest, if you had told me that South Carolina's women's basketball team would have done that, I would have expected that MiLaysia Fulwiley would have played just a little bit of a bigger role. That's not to take anything away from what she did do this past season. Obviously, she had some big games last year, and the one that comes to mind immediately is the SEC Tournament Championship game against the LSU Tigers, a game that maybe could have gone differently if Fulwiley did not put up 20-plus points. But Dawn Staley, she, as I mentioned earlier this week, she did a radio appearance on 107.5 The Game, the local radio station that's mostly associated with South Carolina Gamecock athletics. And she was eventually asked by someone who was, doing some work during that hour, what's the next step for MiLaysia Fulwiley? And Dawn Staley wound up diving into a bit of a conversation that she had with Fulwiley on her goals for this upcoming season. And the answer was pretty intriguing. So take a listen to what Dawn Staley had to say about all of that.
For her, and I'll give you guys, because I try to be as transparent as possible and not give up too much information about, what they want to do personally. Like I asked her, like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do? What are your plans for next year? What are some of the things that you want to get better at? And she said, you know what? She said, when I came in, I just kind of just wanted to fit in and just get the information that I needed. So I didn't really challenge to be a starter. So I was like, okay, so you gonna challenge to be a starter? She was like, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna challenge myself and I'm gonna challenge my teammates to be a starter. And that's pretty mature. I mean, that's the way you actually did. If you look at how she came in, she was feeling things out. And now she's going to take it to the next level.
So you heard it right there from Dawn Staley. MiLaysia Fulwiley is going to push herself to be a starter for this upcoming women's basketball season. And I know that some of you might already be sitting there and you're saying to yourselves, okay, what's the big deal about this? We would expect someone that's got the talent that Fulwiley possesses coming off of a national championship winning season to have that kind of mentality. So why is this earth-shattering? Well, I have to admit, it's not necessarily earth-shattering right now. But the reason why I think this is noteworthy is because I think that this is going to give MiLaysia Fulwiley not just a chance to obviously grow her own individual game, but I also believe it's going to give her an opportunity to show both behind closed doors and also on the court that she can make everybody around her better. Because coming out of last season, I think that maybe even the local fan perception and obviously the national perception is that MiLaysia Fulwiley is a human highlight reel. And so when you think about that, you think about somebody that's pretty much got the ball in their hands on almost every single possession, probably taking the most shots out of everybody on their team. But I think that Fulwiley does want to show that's not the only thing she can do. She can actually push her teammates to also elevate their own game to try to get closer to her God-given level. So when you look at the guard position, for example, I think that's pretty clear and evident that with this new attitude that MiLaysia Fulwiley has, the person that's going to be pushed the most by this is a Raven Johnson, who obviously started point guard this past season. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that Raven Johnson is going to lose her starting job at the point guard spot for this next season. And at the very least, she's not going to make it very easy on MiLaysia Fulwiley. Raven Johnson and Fulwiley, from the outside looking in, they've had a very good relationship to this point as teammates. When Fulwiley was honored at Keenan High School for the fact that she was a part of the national championship team just a few weeks ago, Raven Johnson actually went to the ceremony with her and was in attendance. So kind of a sign that, hey, look, they're pretty close, they hang out, and they seem to get along quite well. But Raven Johnson's also a competitor, and this is a pivotal year for her, going into her 4th season of women's college basketball, which means that after this next season has concluded, Raven Johnson will be eligible for the WNBA draft and could move on to the next level. So obviously, the last thing she'll want to have happen is her maybe lose that starting spot, even though you got to view it differently because it's at South Carolina, and compare that to the rest of the league here at the college level, it's just not the same. Now, Tessa Johnson, she's another person that I think could be pushed by MiLaysia Fulwiley. Now, Johnson is a bit more of a 2-guard and somebody that sometimes will even play the wing position. So how could she be pushed by Fulwiley? Well, the thing is, Tessa Johnson and Fulwiley, they both were in the same class, the 2023 recruiting class. They're both rising sophomores. And I obviously did not play college athletics, but I did play high school football, and I could just tell you from my own personal experience, and I can imagine that from other people's experiences, when you play a team sport and you see someone that's the same age as you, in the same class as you, all of a sudden elevate their game to where they're a lot better than you at that given point in time, it gives you some extra fuel. It gives you extra motivation to want to get better yourself. And so Tessa Johnson, look, kind of like Fulwiley, she had some really good moments last season and showed why, she shouldn't just be forgotten about when you talk about the best young players on this squad heading into next season. So she's going to be pushed. And that's inherently going to push Te-Hina Paopao, who, again, is going into her final season. We know that for a fact because she has no eligibility beyond next year as long as she doesn't get hurt. And she's not going to want to lose her spot to Tessa Johnson, who I have to say I think has a higher ceiling and can do a few more things than maybe Te-Hina Paopao can. So when you look at all of that, it's very easy to see why, if MiLaysia Fulwiley is really serious about pushing for a starting spot, even if it's going to be really hard for her to get it, it could make everybody else around her better. That will start at the guard spot undoubtedly, and it could permeate its way to the other position groups on this basketball team. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how things play out this offseason, and who knows, if Dawn Staley maybe makes changes to the lineup, if she sees that some players have surpassed others in terms of their on-court performance in practice and in scrimmages against their highlighter scrimmage squad this offseason. Now, my opinion has already changed regarding another sports team for South Carolina when it comes to their football team. More specifically, 2 different position groups coming out of spring ball. One of those position groups changed my mind in a positive way, while the other one changed my mind in a bit of a negative way. I'll talk about the 2 position groups that I'm referring to in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to this Friday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen, wherever you get your audio podcast daily, or your first watch on YouTube. Let's talk about the two position groups that changed my mind on South Carolina's football team this past spring. The spring game obviously took place just 2 weeks ago now from today, or at least close to it. And we didn't get a whole lot out of the game, but I did walk away with some differing opinions, both good and bad. So the position group that changed my mind on them in a positive way was the running back room. We all know going into this upcoming season that South Carolina's running back position, it is in a much better spot. And obviously, that starts with Arkansas transfer Raheem Rocket Sanders, a former first-team All-SEC selection at the running back spot, somebody that dominated the league when he was over there at Arkansas, dealt with some injury issues this past season, along with quarterback KJ Jefferson, so he decided to enter the portal and wound up at South Carolina, and he is going to be a good running mate alongside Lenore Sellers in the offensive backfield. But because Sanders has been recovering from an offseason procedure the past few weeks, he wasn't able to participate in the spring game. And so we got to see some other running backs go out there and get an opportunity to show what they could do. And that started with North Texas transfer Oscar Attaway III. I was very impressed with Oscar Attaway. Did not mention this in my reaction show, I believe, right after the spring game had concluded. But Oscar Attaway, in my opinion, he is going to be a big threat at that running back spot because he just does all the little things right. He's not going to juke a guy out of his cleats. He's not going to hurdle a cornerback that tries to tackle him right around the knees near the sideline. But Oscar Attaway is going to get you a lot of yardage after contact in between the tackles. He is very savvy, knows where the open hole is. He's a little bit shifty, at least just enough to get himself into that position. And he also has a very compact frame that can be tough to bring down if you're not tackling him fundamentally the right way. So Oscar Attaway is going to be a solid rotational back at that running back spot. The other guy that stood out to me was Dontavius Braswell. And Braswell, we all know from last season, when Braswell has open space in front of him, that is when he is the most dangerous because speed, that is his best trait when he can get to the perimeter or get to the edge on an outside run, and he's got an open lane in front of him. But one thing I did pick up on when watching this spring game, and granted, I was not there at the stadium to watch the game, but Dontavius Braswell, from at least my perspective, he looked a little bit bigger. He looked like he added a little bit of good weight to his frame so that he is not going to be as easy to bring down like he might have been maybe this past season as a true freshman. And again, kind of like Oscar Attaway, while Braswell's got speed, there's not necessarily a whole lot of agility moves that he possesses in his arsenal, but if he's got a little bit more weight and he hasn't really lost any of the speed that he displayed this past season, Braswell's going to be a much more dangerous back. And then you bring in, a Jawarn Howell, transfer running back from South Carolina State. You bring in a Matthew Fuller from the state of Georgia, and you've also got the veteran in Juju McDowell, who's still going to probably play a role in that running back rotation this coming season. This is a very deep running back room. This is a room where obviously I'm not going to sit here and say that you would be okay with losing a Rocket Sanders because no one would want to lose a Rocket Sanders. But if something were to happen, if Sanders were to get dinged up a little bit, or even an Oscar Attaway, you don't have to panic like you probably would have had to last season when Mario Anderson Jr. went down in that backfield, because South Carolina's got numbers, but also guys that can actually handle going out there in this offensive system. So as far as the running back position goes, I already felt like that it was going to be better going into this coming football season, but leaving the spring, I'm feeling a lot better about that running back spot. I would say that it is probably the deepest position group, especially on the offensive side of the ball, maybe one of the deepest on the entire roster. Now, while that position group impressed in the spring game and changed my opinion on them in a positive way, there was another position group on the offensive side of the ball that changed my opinion in a bit of a negative way. We'll talk about that group in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get in Monopoly Go. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day, with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique minigames, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. All right, let's talk about the position group that changed my opinion on them in a negative way coming out of spring ball for South Carolina's football program. And that position group was the wide receiver position group. Now, I will say this. They did not change my opinion to a significant degree. As y'all probably heard me coming out of the December transfer portal window, I already was not necessarily impressed with the overall makeup of the wide receiver room. And that's not to say that this room doesn't have good pieces in there. I thought Gage Larvadain was a solid pickup from Miami of Ohio. I think Mazio Bennett can definitely help this team out in year one. And there's other guys that have some promise in that room as well. But the thing I did not like was the lack of downfield threats that this team seemed to have, at least from maybe a jump ball standpoint. Because I know some of those guys, they've got speed, but you need more than just speed if you're going to win down the field in the passing game. Now, Shane Beamer and his staff, they did try to alleviate that area a little bit just earlier this week by landing two transfer portal wide receivers, one in Dalvin Campbell from Nevada, and one Vandravis Jacobs from Florida State. But the thing about this wide receiver group that concerns me coming out of spring, and even still concerns me in spite of those additions, is that I worry that Lenore Sellers is not going to get to use one of the best traits that he has, and that is just his sheer arm strength. We saw it a little bit this past season, and if you watched him play at South Florence High School, he is known for being able to chuck the ball up 60-plus yards down the field with ease. And while, again, you can win down the field with just sheer speed and route running, it's not always going to work out that way, especially against individual SEC talent. And it really bothered me, the fact that, for the most part, with the first two units really on the field offensively, we never really saw any deep passes down the field. Now, part of that obviously comes from the fact that offensive coordinator Dowell Loggins, he said going into the game that it was going to be like plain vanilla ice cream. You weren't going to see a whole lot of the extra pizzazz and all that good stuff. And he was right. We did not see a whole lot of that. But usually you would like to see at least maybe 1 or 2 deep passes in a game, maybe from a route concept that's not that complex that everybody knows defensively speaking. And we never even got that. And I would have to assume that at least a couple times a play like that was called for Lenore Sellers or Robbie Ashford to run. And if that was the case, if we're assuming that's the case, then that just means that the guys just weren't open. So obviously there's a confluence of factors that you can point to for why maybe we did not see that in the spring game. But it just bothers me a little bit when you combine that with the fact that, again, coming out of spring, before the Gamecocks landed Campbell and Jacobs this past week, that the wide receiver room, it just didn't have a whole lot of size to it. And then you throw in what happened in the spring or what didn't happen in the spring game, it's still a concern to me. And it made my concerns even more heightened when they did not have a single deep ball that got completed in the spring game. If you're going to make Lenore Sellers have to go out there and basically pick guys apart through his accuracy and basically using his legs along with leaning on the ground game, then having to hope that the offensive line is going to block good enough for those guys, I'm a bit worried about that. So the wide receiver room, that is a position group where whether it is Dowell Loggins changing up his scheme, finding some different ways to get those guys maybe open downfield, or a couple of those guys step up like the guys that they're adding, or a Nick Harper who wasn't even really a part of the team's activities this spring. Well, let me rephrase that. He wasn't a part of practice. He remained involved, but he wasn't able to go out there every single day in practice with his teammates and then go in the spring game. I'm a bit worried, to say the least. So that position group raised my level of concern with them coming out of the spring. Which group did that for you? Which group made you a bit more optimistic leaving spring ball? And what are your thoughts on MiLaysia Fulwiley having a new attitude going into this offseason and how that could impact her teammates moving forward? Let me know your thoughts on all those topics down below in the comments section if you watch this show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Friday and a fantastic weekend, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.